Well, to talk more about the rising power of the BRICS, Peter Schiff, president of Euro-Pacific Capital, joins us now. Welcome, Peter. Talk to us about the significance of this summit.
Well, it's only significant if they come to any significant decisions or conclusions on what to do about some of their common problems. I think the biggest common problem for the BRIC nations is how to deal with the United States and, more specifically, the U.S. dollar. All these BRIC countries are accumulating enormous dollar reserves. The dollar is going to lose a lot of value, and so that means these BRIC nations are going to lose a lot in the real value of those reserves. A lot of these BRIC nations are running trade surpluses with the United States, but of course the United States is not in a position to actually pay for these products, so they're participating in vendor financing. And these are real problems, and the world needs to wean itself off of this vendor financing scheme and needs to find a way to get out from under the dollar as the reserve currency.
And now they're expected to sign an agreement allowing them to extend credit to each other in their own local currency. Do you see this as a step toward replacing the dollar?
It's a step. I mean, it's certainly a movement towards that direction. And the more other nations begin to invoice each other in their own currencies and trade bilaterally in their own currencies and not try to do everything through the U.S. dollar, the less dependent they become on the dollar, and the more vulnerable the U.S. economy becomes to the day that the dollar is no longer accepted around the world as the predominant reserve currency.
Now, another announcement that they are expected to make tomorrow is this plan for the countries to form a joint development bank. Do you think that this could rival the World Bank, and if so, how?
Well, I don't think that the World Bank is a particularly useful institution, so I don't think that this is a good sign to see countries trying to follow what is a very bad example and to try to create more structures from government. I think what the BRIC nations need to understand, and what all nations need to understand, is the less government involvement in their economies, the better. What they want to do is get out of the way. They want to make government as small as possible, have as few regulations, as low taxes, so that businesses can thrive, so that production can increase and living standards can rise, particularly, for the middle and lower classes. And, the best way to achieve that is not through government-created institutions, but through the private sector.
Now, a criticism that this group often gets is the fact that they are so different. They're on different continents. They have very different economies, very different governments. So some critics say that BRICS serve nothing more than an acronym. Do you think that the countries will be able to find enough common ground?
Well, there's no real movement for them to join politically into some type of BRIC nation. They do have certain things in common, and they might have some common problems, and so I can see why they might want to get together and see if they could collectively come up with some solutions or talk about some of these problems with each other. But I don't think that, other than maybe a freer trade relationships, I mean, to the extent that any nation can reduce trade barriers between itself and other nations, it will benefit the citizens of both countries. But they're not trying to come together like the European nations did and form a common political structure or common currency. That's not what this summit is about. They maybe are trying to just kind of rival some of these G7 summits or G8 summits where other nations get together and they get the headlines and they talk. Maybe they, it's like you can't get into that club, so form a club of your own. And the interesting thing is a lot of the nations in the G7, like the United States, are big debtors. We're borrowing a bunch of money. So I think that a club of creditors makes a lot more sense than to take a look at the people who are going around the world begging for money. Maybe some of these countries that are generating all the surpluses that everybody is begging for a share of, well, maybe they should get together and kind of form their own club.
Now, the BRICS together, they do make up some of the fastest growing economies in the world right now. Do you think that this at least signifies a shift in power in terms of global economics? I remember just a few months ago, they were considering bailing out the Eurozone.
Yeah. Well, the summit itself, I think, doesn't necessarily signify anything. What would signify it is their accumulated surpluses. Look at all the wealth that they're acquiring. Look at all the production. Look at all the goods and services. Look at the resources that they're able to import and the investments they're making around the world. That's a greater sign of their power than the fact that they wanted to convene. A lot of times, these meetings are just an excuse for some bureaucrats to have a party on taxpayer money. And so I don't think the meeting is really what you want to look to. You really want to look to what's happening in the countries, in their economies. And, I think that the biggest problem, again, collectively, is the drag that's coming from the U.S. A lot of people think that the U.S. is benefiting all these BRICS and other countries because we're the customer. We're the big consumer of their products. But my point is that we are dragging these economies down because we might be consuming their products, but we're really not paying for them. They're really not getting something of value in exchange for the products they give us. They're getting treasury bills that are going to depreciate. And, right now they're holding on to them, but it's a gigantic bubble, and the dollar is going to collapse and the bond's going to collapse. And the BRICS need to realize that they have their own engines, that they don't need to sell their goods to America. They've got plenty of consumers in their own country that can actually afford to buy these goods if they would simply allow their currencies to rise and they stop buying U.S. dollars.
Now, regardless, their economies, they are all on the rise, and with this, the tides have kind of turned in that way. Do you think that the West and the U.S. can kind of learn from their economies? Is there something that we can learn from them?
Well, I mean, we certainly. I mean, there's a lot that they already learned from us. Unfortunately, we're not learning much from our own history. Well, I would rather see Americans today, instead of looking at the modern-day BRICS, just learn history. Just go back and study the U.S. Constitution. Look at what it was that made America so rich. How were we able to achieve so much in the 19th century? How did we create the world's most prosperous economy? We don't have to look at examples in Russia or China to know how capitalism works. We need to learn from our own examples. The problem is that the rest of the world is doing a better job of following our example than we are.
All right, Peter, pleasure to have you on the show. As always, that was Peter Schiff, president at Euro Pacific Capital.